What up, y'all? The Knight of Green here with an in-depth analysis on the mighty kingdom of Boletaria from Demon's Souls. In this video, I will create lore theories about how this small yet diligent land operated before the discovery of the soul arts, which ultimately led to this kingdom's untimely fall during the second demon scourge. I will also take a look at the real-life inspirations behind the armor and weapons to help paint a picture of how this kingdom compared to real-world civilizations. Sadly, I am using the PS3 version of the game as I do not own a PS5 just yet. Looking at you, scalpers. If or when I do acquire the new hardware, I can make a follow-up video to see how the changes in the remake would affect my theories. If you like this type of content, please support the channel by subscribing, liking the video, sharing my work with friends and family, and follow me on other social media platforms. I post short-form discussions relating to the weapon and martial arts depiction in video games. You can also stick around till the end of the video if you wish to learn more about the future of Demon's Slice, the Demon's Souls animated martial arts and parody series. Anyway, without further ado, let us go on with the video. As with my martial arts theories on the iconic bosses from the FromSoft games, take what I say moving forward with not just a grain of salt, but a whole mountain of it, as I am mainly using outside historical sources as the basis for the ideas in this video. Of course, you can tell me that I'm overthinking things, but remember, you are talking to the guy who flips around in the woods like Artorias to see just if fictional martial arts would be useful in a real-world sword fight. The first thing we'll take a look at is the Boletarian coat of arms. In-game, there are 3 different interpretations of this, one found on the Archstone to the area, one in the Tower Knight boss room, and one on the flags leading up to the Penetrator. Each is slightly different, so my t-shirt designer, Mondrachne, and I, together came up with a unified version. It uses the shield of the Tower Knight boss room as the base, has some of the additional details of the Boletarian archway, and uses the color patterns found on the banners. I also love the added details of the 3 swords of the Boletarian royal family, Demonbrant, Soulbrant, and the Northern Regalia. It kind of gives me an Attack on Titan vibes, not gonna lie. Link below to purchase this shirt in the description. Now, I point this out because a coat of arms can tell us a lot about what a civilization values. Each aspect, down to the coloration and the symbols, all have their own meanings and significance according to heraldry. Here is a rough breakdown of the meaning behind the Boletarian coat of arms. Shield background. A nation that fights on the defensive. 4 sections and quarters. Unions between families and nations. Gold coloring. Wisdom, generosity, glory, constancy, and faith. Blue coloring. Loyalty, chastity, truth, strength, faith. Scale pattern in the top left section can be reptile scales, which could mean vigilance against threats or wisdom. Missile pattern, top right section. Persuasive, possessing secrets and knowledge not commonly owned by others. Central sword, justice and military honor. Circle, being significant geographically, scientifically, or intellectually. As a side note, both the sword and circle can also represent the connections to the Nexus, considering it bears a resemblance to the Nexus teleportation devices. Doves, loving constancy and peace. East and south points of the cross, Patti, military honor. North and west points, cross, Molin, societal achievement and progress. Stars signifies divinity, but its placement on the underside of the cross could mean of a partial or improper sort. Likely represents the demigod Doran, the first king of Boletaria, and technically the first Elant. One thing that's interesting is the fact that only the Archstone in the Nexus has this detail, but it is absent on all other versions of the coat of arms, suggesting that the presence of Old King Doran is largely kept a secret to the current denizens of Boletaria. 11 diamonds surrounding the cross, the 11 kings that proceeded after Old King Doran. The bottom fleur de lis, purity and nobility, while in real life this signifies the French royal family, based on the flags bearing the symbol appearing in the throne room and the intersections of Boletaria. It can signify the Alliance royal family. This is also important since it may tie to the soldier's lotus, a partially symbolic plant used in first aid by the Boletarian soldiers to stop wounds from bleeding out. An overarching theme seen here seems to be the high value placed on military might and wisdom. Boletaria most certainly was a nation that reveled in war, something not too far-fetched considering their founder, old King Doran, the macho, Spartan king Leonidas himself, was described as being the eternal warrior. Realistically, you can say that war was in this nation's blood. However, something commonly described in the lore was how small the kingdom of Boletaria was, signifying it had low populations and/or territory. Because Boletaria's military was not necessarily all that large, the nation had to be crafty and strategic to fend off the attacks from rivaling nations. For one, we can see that the Boletarians built their strongholds on mountains and cliff sides, making invasions difficult for opposing adversaries. Boletaria's architecture also integrated a confusing set of maze and choke points with a variety of boulder and flaming oil traps in order to thin out the numbers of potential invaders. While small in number, Boletaria's soldiers were well trained and armed and could very easily fend off against larger forces using the before mentioned advantages. One of my favorite traps that they use is the exploding black powder barrels. It is possible that Boletaria was at the advent of developing primitive firearms, but stopped due to the discovery of the soul arts, which essentially filled the role of the powerful armor-piercing ranged projectiles. Imagine if Boletaria had not developed the soul arts. King Alon would be running around, strapped alongside his buddy Glock Saint Ishi. However, despite the nation's bloody past, by the time we come to visit the land, we can see that it is a superpower that has anchored itself as the epicenter of trade and commerce. Based on the weapons, armor, and architecture, Boletaria reminds me of a blend of late medieval and early Renaissance Germany, Scotland, and Scandinavia. Boletaria is described as having different regions, suggesting that it is a blending pot of different cultures. Of course, despite how the narration presents Boletaria as some sort of utopia, it was a society based on classism, with the low-born citizens being treated poorly and the high-end nobility hogging most of the wealth and resources. At the lowest ranks of the Boletarian social class were the humans that became the Dreglings. Considering how they are often found near construction sites, scaffolds, and hand-powered gates and elevators, they likely composed of the low-class citizens and slaves from conquered lands that did most of the manual hard labor. They could not afford personal combat gear and had to resort to scavenging from corpses and using cut-out wooden planks, barrels, stools, and buckets as substitutes for armor and shields. Rogue Dreglings that were disobedient were branded as traitors to the king. These unfortunate souls were tortured and executed in brutal manners near the entrance of the Boletarian palace. While these executions were public displays for entertaining crowds, they also served as a reminder to the living to stay in line with the law, unjust as it may be. Dreglings also acted as makeshift frontline troops on battlefields, though they were not equipped or capable of actually defeating their opponents. They were more or less used as fodder to hold enemies in place, while the Boletarian crossbowmen and trebuchets opened fire on friend and foe alike. Press F in the chat for our Dregling brothers. Next were the Boletarian Soldiers. These men were the backbone of the army, armed with a variety of helmets and weapons, though they all owned mail armor, a leather gambeson on top, metal greaves on their shins, and metal gauntlets on their hands. The archers were armed with light crossbows and were adorned with a leather headcap. They most likely were lower middle-class citizens who operated as hunters, but formed the range troops in times of war. Next were the Axton Swordsmen. They wore helmets partially inspired by Scandinavian designs and also owned wooden round shields that were reinforced with metal. It is possible that these soldiers were either hired mercenaries or were from allied nations based on how distinct their helmets and weapons are compared to other troop types. Next were the Spearmen, who owned a German-inspired kettle hat. These soldiers were of a higher middle class, and may have included the apprentices and squires to the knights. Last were the soldiers with the halberds. They owned German-inspired sallet helmets. Pretty much these guys served as constables for upholding law and order in Boletaria. The knights were the highest rank in the Boletarian army and were comprised of the nobility. Features of the knights were their full sets of fluted armor over mail, all while wielding the best shields, arming swords, spears, and great swords that money could buy. At the low end are the blue-eyes, knights. They most likely consisted of lesser nobles. They served as low-ranking captains and were in charge of small battalions of troops. Next were the red-eyes, knights. Individuals who adorned themselves with a metallic crest that had no other practical use in battle outside of signifying their high rank. Considering how old King Doron dons Greco-Roman style armor, it is possible that these crests were inspired by the age of antiquity. These soldiers were in charge of larger brigades of soldiers and served directly under the Knights of the Round Table. The Knights of the Round Table were the generals of the army and had distinct power in the nation. They served under King Allant directly and may have had specific duties in the castle, based on the positions of their boss battles. Longbow Ulan the Phalanx was in charge of the outer wall, artillery, and other ranged defenses. Alfred the Tower Knight monitored the transportation of goods in and out of the capital. Metas the Lance Knight, or the Penetrator, was in charge of the elite soldiers of the inner walls. Lastly, the twin fangs Bior and Valorfax, based on Bior's dialogue, may have served as royal bodyguards to the king and the prince. However, outside of the established military roles, there were other individuals that played a huge role in the workings of Boletaria. First, we have the fat officials, who before being transformed into demons, served as slimy ambassadors and politicians. Due to their strength in wielding their axes, which were more like bardishes, they may actually have been knights who retired from the military services and decided to aid the kingdom through other more nefarious and underhanded means. Considering their large, rotund, swaying bellies, they seemed to be getting the lion's share of the resources. After them were the Imperial spies, who were used to investigate, infiltrate, and sabotage rivaling nations in order to give Boletaria an edge in warfare. Basically, they were Allant's little ninjas. They wore armor called a jack of plate, which were interlacing small iron plates in between canvas or felt. They were well versed in unarmed and dagger-based combat arts, but somehow they carry German Fleming swords or flameblade greatswords in their sleeves, which I suppose is neat, but I wish they used them in combat. Of course, we cannot forget the attack dogs as well. Based on their proximity to the pathways that connect the inner areas of Boletaria to the prisons, they were probably used for detecting contraband materials and for chasing down runaway criminals and prisoners. The Boletaria castle area did not seem to have a lot of fertile land for growing crops, so imports from nearby settlements were used to sustain the military and the elites. Imagine if we went to the outside of Boletaria and fought dreglings that had scythes like the Bloodborne hunters. Yeah, that'd be cool, but I think that'd also be really scary. We know that Boletaria most likely owned vassal nations such as Stonefang, so it is likely that the fat officials, attack dogs, and the Imperial spies were used as a means to monitor and keep other nations in check to prevent the military forces from being spread too thin across regions. Boletaria is described as using the soul arts to gain wealth and prosperity, which, considering the time period, this largely means that they augmented their troops and steamrolled the opposition to conquer lands. Alas, at this point, we know exactly what happens next. The kingdom, for what it had built, fell into ruin to the demon scourge when the old one awakened in response to the soul arts being rediscovered. It is a shame, really. Imagine all the hard work done in 12 generations. 12 generations of slave labor comes crumbling down due to the disgruntled visions of one man playing with things he does not understand. Such is the way of empires, I suppose. None are destined to last forever. Hey guys, thank you for sticking around to the end of the video. Right now I'm just going to be talking a little bit about Demon Slice and the future moving forward. So as I said before in a previous video, we're going to be relaunching the Kickstarter campaign May 2021. And I've also created a website in order for me to gauge just how much people are interested in either supporting this project or just wanted to share it with friends or family or wanted to see it come to life. So link below in the description if you wanted to check out our website and see if you're interested in supporting Demon Slice and our relaunch. But anyway, that is the end of this video and the end of my little sponsorship. Have a nice day, y'all. Cheers and bye.